We'll be live imminently. And we're live. Wonderful. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our last Ask Our Ambassadors live stream session of this term. Interviews are just around the corner, so if you have questions about how to prepare for interviews, please leave them in the comment section, and I will try and answer them best as can, as I'm sure will our wonderful ambassadors who are here with me today. I'm Alfie, I'm the Outreach and Admissions Officer for the English faculty, and I'm joined by Annabelle and Heta. So Annabelle, you can introduce yourself first.
Hi everyone, I'm Annabelle Dennis. I go by she, her pronouns, by the way. I'm a second year course 2 student at Mansfield College.
Lovely, thank you. And Heta.
Hiya, I'm Heta. I also go by she, her pronouns, and I'm a second year course 2 student as well at Worcester College.
Lovely, thank you very much. So with interviews on the horizon, I think they start being next week. So we've just got the weekend until it all kicks off. What do you two remember of your interviews? Your very general impressions now that you are firmly in the Oxford swing of things in second year. If you look back at them now, how do you remember your interviews? Heta, tell us.
As nerve-wracking as I remember, as nervous as I remember being, it was actually like quite a nice adventure to just be able to know that like you've made it to this stage, and you know not many do.
No, that's true.
And just to like sort of take it all in and try and look at it as just an experience to try and enjoy and remember and make the most out of. That was what I was constantly trying to remind myself of as I was there. And now that I look back, it was like a little adventure.
Brilliant, thank you. And Annabelle, your very distant recollections of interviews.
So for me, it was a similar thing. It was an adventure. I think it's exactly what I needed to solidify my decision to come here. Because before then, obviously, Oxford is a very unique experience. I feel like you kind of need to experience it in that setting when you're doing your interviews to see actually whether it is a good fit for you, not even to see, obviously it is important to see if you'll get in, but it's just as important for you in your decision to actually come and study here.
Completely. I think that's very valuable advice. And for all those who may be watching but don't know about it yet, a really good program by which you might find out whether Oxford is for you is the unique digital program. So you can go to, I think it's just https://unique.co.uk. Let me check that. Yeah, just unique, UNIQ, and that's a summer school project run by Oxford University for people who are from lower advantaged backgrounds coming into university, showing them what it's really all about. But what is it really all about? Let's hear it from some students. When you're at that point of interview, you're just about to come up, you've had your invitation. How are you feeling? Oxford, what do you feel of Oxford? What does it look like to you? What does your college look like from the outside? Can you remember anything about that, kind of any, not fears precisely, but not prejudices either, just things you remember thinking, oh, this is Oxford, what am I going to do? Annabelle, start with you.
So for me, looking at it from the outside, it was quite scary. I'd never been anywhere like this before. It was quite intimidating, all the grand buildings. But actually, once I got in there, I just discovered that it was a lovely, warm community and there was nothing to be afraid of at all.
No, pretty much. I mean, this isn't a place where souls go to die. I mean, our nice little tree is growing happily. It's not a crushing place of stress. We're pretty nice here. Heta, how about you? What was going through your mind when you got your interview invite in the week before?
Yeah, I remember being it felt very surreal and like, oh, this has actually happened. I'm actually going. But yeah, I think like Annabelle said, once you get to the interview stage, everyone there is in the same boat as you. And if they're not, they're going to be student ambassadors who are more than happy to talk to you about any concerns, just tell you about college life, even just show you around. So it felt very it already felt like there was a sense of community just in the fact that all the students there, everyone you're sort of socializing with, eating with, they're all in the same boat as you. They're all going through the same nerves and excitement and all of that. So there was a sense of like community, despite the fact that it could be very surreal at times.
Sure. I can remember that actually. You're right, the kind of surreal feeling, but definitely of community as well. You're all being interviewed together. And I suppose that might be dampened significantly by virtual interviews and doing them from your bedroom or your home. But that doesn't mean that the interview is in any way fundamentally different. So with that in mind, I think I'll ask you what you both no, let's start it from the other end. Maybe things you wish you had done in your interview that you weren't able to do or didn't do as well as you think you could have. We'll start with those negative things, not necessarily negative, but things you would have liked to improve, to show people that you can always be self-critical and always have room to improve. But ultimately, that level is still good enough to get a place at Oxford. So Heta, what do you look back on and think, oh, if only I'd done that slightly differently?
I think for me, I wish I'd like been more confident and assured in some of the answers I gave. So yeah, I think just like having the confidence to put your own ideas out there to tutors and develop them, and be confident in that this is what you've come up with, this is your sort of idea about whatever it may be, and to stick with that and really sort of work through it and almost sort of showcase why you've come up with that, and to just be a bit more bolder and confident about some of the answers I was giving.
Wonderful, thank you. And Annabelle, anything you kind of wish you might have done differently?
I was going to say the exact same thing. I wish I had more confidence and in my own ideas. I think I was very nervous in the interview. I didn't do any interview prep. So I felt wholly unprepared. But actually, as the interview went on, I kind of relaxed a little bit and it felt more like an informal chat, which was great. But I was still very tentative in what I was saying. And I wish I just had the courage to really push my own ideas and back them rather than feel like I had to constantly be second guessing what I was saying. Like you do have good ideas and you have every right to defend them, even when you are interviewing at Oxford and they are trying to get you to second guess it. I think they really value it when you can hold your ground.
Oh, certainly. I think that's a very valuable thing to mention. I think it's also important that you're saying kind of when to hold your ground and when to understand that maybe you aren't quite in the right place. It's about that flexibility, certainly. And I think having confidence in your own ideas is something that's much easier kind of said and certainly retrospectively than done at the time. But I think the big boon that people who have been invited to interviews need to take away is that you've been invited to an interview. The Oxford tutors clearly think you've got interesting enough things to say. They've read your personal statement, they've read your written work, they've read your ELAT, and they're clearly impressed. So if you can think back to it in those terms, what do you think you could have told yourself a moment before going into your interview? Not as we just talked about, that you wish you would have done, but something you could have said to yourself to kind of inspire that confidence that you both wish you had had. Heta, you go.
I would have told myself to breathe. I was very panicked. But also just to remind myself that I'm here for a reason. As you say, like there's so many steps to just getting an interview that it's not a fluke. They've not, made a mistake. There are so many processes that it genuinely is your ideas, your writing, your thinking that they're intrigued by, and they want to see more of that in the interview. So yeah, just breathe and remember that you're here for a reason, and it's a good reason as well.
It is. It's definitely a good reason, and it's definitely not a fluke. I've spent the last month making sure there are no flukes. It's my job to get this right. No, it's certainly an indicator that you are an interesting person, and these academics are interested in you. So definitely, please take that as an invitation for confidence. I know it's not the easiest thing in the world to do, and that's not necessarily an age thing. It's always hard to try and really trust in yourself and what you're bringing. But you've had this invite from prestigious academics who want to see what you can talk about. Annabelle, how about you? What would you have said to yourself a moment before sitting down for that interview?
I think just to enjoy it, because I like Heta, I was very much, I literally wasn't allowing myself a chance to breathe. I was so nervous, overthinking everything. And actually, it's a really enjoyable experience. And even if you don't get past the interview stage, what a wonderful experience to say that you got to interview at Oxford anyway.
Definitely. I think that's a really positive way of looking at it. It is a unique experience, and whether it leads you on a path to a place here or on a path to another academic institution, you will have whatever time you end up having. You can't pin all your hopes on that interview. But let's move now slightly away from where we've started, and we're going to, as we've been saying, things we enjoyed in our interview. What surprised you most as something you didn't necessarily think would be enjoyable? Annabelle, you mentioned enjoyment first.
So I was really surprised by how interested my tutors were about talking about things outside of literature. So for example, one of my favorite books is Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier, and one of my tutors started talking about the film adaptation, and that was really interesting, and it made me realize they are actually humans that have interests outside of their academic lives, and it just made it a whole lot more enjoyable. Then it did really feel like we were just having a chat. I wasn't being quizzed, I wasn't being interrogated. It was just a really nice chat about things we both enjoyed.
I think that's brilliant advice. They are humans too, with enjoyments, and those enjoyments aren't always stuffing your nose in a good book. It's how do books impact us in other ways? So films, certainly. I still think one of the most amusing things I've seen is pictures of a very well-respected English tutor on a hovercraft in Florida. She showed me her vacation photos, and I think they're great. They're really fun. Sorry, Heta, what did you enjoy that you weren't expecting to really find enjoyable about an interview?
Well, I didn't really know what to expect from the interview. I didn't know what sort of questions they were going to ask, but I think a lot of it is very familiar. And with me, sort of like the best piece of advice I got going into interviews was they're not always looking for answers. You don't always need to know answers when you're going in.
Definitely.
So even just like working through the text I had, I didn't really know what it was about, if I'm honest. But by the end, just by them helping me and me sort of talking through my thoughts, I found that I actually understood it. And so it's like a two-way conversation. It's not just you being grilled on what's this and what does this mean. Like there's, a thought process there, and they're very willing to help and sort of nudge you along into sort of solidifying your answers. So yeah, that was the main thing, that it felt very two-way.
Definitely. And I think that's important to realize, that you don't need all the answers, because what's the point of teaching you? What's the point of going to university if you have all the answers? No, I think that two-way kind of pushing you into a different path of thinking is a very important thing to be aware of. You mentioned you didn't really have too many ideas going in what would be included, but I think a good interview will have some form of, are you sure about this? Would you like to reconsider? And it's brilliant if you do, because that shows that you can critique not only other people's writings and arguments, but your own, which is a very important academic skill to learn. And I say to learn because it's not something that everybody starts off knowing. It's a point of coming to university, a point of learning about literature. It's about learning to be a literary critic. Okay, so those were two things that you didn't really expect to enjoy and did enjoy. What was something that completely caught you off guard that you didn't know about, but were able to kind of adapt in the moment and say, okay, here's an educated answer that I can give? Heta.
I remember being asked specifically about Shakespeare, who I hadn't mentioned in my personal statement or at any stage of the application process. And I was like,
Right.
oh, okay. But obviously it's things that you're familiar with through, school. You always sort of tap into that. And so it's okay as well to just give your actual opinion. So, for example, if you didn't like a certain play that he's written, it's okay to just say that and then explain why and sort of have that conversation. So although it did catch me off guard, it wasn't necessarily, a completely far out of the left field sort of question. It was still familiar ground.
Yeah, I think that notion of familiarity is quite important, because you do tend to see certainly in tabloid press, a lot of Oxford asks this bizarre question to people, and they're always taken out of context. So the whole kind of mythology of an Oxford interview being people are trying to ask sly questions and make you feel bad for not knowing things is total rubbish. So I mean, exactly, you weren't expecting to be asked about Shakespeare. You were asked about it, but you found yourself on pretty solid ground after a few moments of thinking and gave it a great answer. That's exactly what tutors are looking for. Annabelle, how about you? Something that unsettled you, but you're able to give a good answer to?
So I think one of the things that completely caught me off guard was the poetry interview.
Okay.
I think I just expected that all the poems would be super classical. And the poem I was given was very obscure and contemporary. And it completely threw me off guard, and I panicked. I didn't understand the poem. And I found out after the interview that it was about a spaceman, and I thought it was about arranged marriage. And I'd argued this all throughout the interview, but actually they let me go with it because it wasn't about just actually pinpointing what the poem was about and who it was by. And it was just to see my thought process and how creative I can be in a high pressure situation. So what originally started off as being quite panic inducing became quite intriguing and interesting then when I discovered, oh, actually it's about this. How does that change your interpretation? It actually was quite enjoyable.
Oh, brilliant. I'm glad to hear. So let's quickly overview the interview process, shall we? You get usually at least 2 interviews. One is on things you have submitted, so your personal statement. Maybe they'll ask you about the written work, or sometimes some tutors will just ask you, what are you reading right now? What would you like to talk about? And then the other interview is, as Annabelle's just mentioned, on a piece of unseen poetry. So we've heard a bit about Annabelle's unseen poetry. Heta, could you tell us about yours and how, kind of walk us through exactly what happened? So did you get 20 minutes or 30 minutes to look at it beforehand?
I'm pretty sure I got 5.
5? Ooh.
I don't think it was very long.
No.
Oh, okay.
And yeah, it was a very short poem though, and it was pretty straightforward as far as I remember. Like, it was about a seagull on a beach. And yeah, I just had to sort of, you were given it, you weren't given anything else, you just sort of pick things that jump out at you, things you notice, things that you can talk about. And then went off to the interview, and yeah, they just sort of asked me at first, what did you make of the poem, what sort of things did you pick out in the poem, and then conversations sort of blossom from there. So it's not something that you can plan in its entirety, like, I'm going to talk about this and then I'm going to talk about that. But I think the way that conversations progress naturally from the point of you analysing it in a classroom or whatever is like very sort of helpful, and just makes you feel quite natural. And so it's not sort of like, okay, they're trying to trick me out or they're trying to ask a particularly difficult question. It's just natural conversations, as you would if you were maybe talking to a friend, like, oh, well, we've read this and what do you think? It progresses a lot more naturally, just perhaps with a bit more nudging, because obviously you're talking to some amazing professionals. But yeah, so maybe a little bit less informal, but it was still very natural and not at all scary, because I was always intimidated by poetry and I was very stressed about the idea of analysing a poem. But it was, as I said, sort of very stress-free environment in that sense. It wasn't it wasn't overly difficult just for the sake of difficulty's sake.
Brilliant. And so kind of staying on that theme, Annabelle, how did you react when you found out that there was an unseen poem? I don't want to say that it's always going to be a poem, because I think sometimes it might just be a short extra, it might be a paragraph from a book or something, but it usually is a poem. Yeah, Hetta isn't a fan of, at that point, wasn't a fan. She might have changed her mind about poetry. How were you, Annabelle, when you found out that that was part of one of the interviews you'd have to do? How did you react to that?
So I think close reading and poetry are actually things I really enjoy doing.
Oh, right.
So for me, I wasn't necessarily too worried about it. I was more excited for it. I think I would have felt slightly differently if I was given prose, because I don't necessarily enjoy prose as much. But I think regardless of what text they give you, it doesn't matter if you like it or not. As long as you can demonstrate your analytical skills, then you're fine. You don't have to worry too much about, oh, am I going to hate the poem? Am I going to like the poem? Am I going to like the experience? It's just something you have to do. And if you can try to enjoy it, then that's great.
Certainly. And yeah, as we've just heard from two ambassadors, an interview isn't necessarily to everyone's taste. But that doesn't mean that because you've gone into it thinking, oh, I really like poetry, I can do this, and oh, I don't really like poetry so much, I can't really do this, that you won't be at any disadvantage, as we see they are both here today. Okay, so that's the unseen part of the interview. Could you tell us about your other interview and how that panned out and what you ended up talking about? Annabelle first.
Do you mean the interview where it's about like everything you submitted?
Yeah, so what did you actually end up talking about?
I think it varies
some
a
people
lot.
get their written work, some people get statements.
Yeah,
what did you do?
so it does vary a lot. Mine was largely on my personal statement. My submitted work wasn't actually spoken about at all.
Okay.
It was solely on my personal statement and the books I'd mentioned and the extracurricular I'd mentioned. And there was a little bit mentioned about the syllabus I was doing at A-level, but largely my personal statement. Yeah.
Wonderful. And so what had you written about that you started discussing in greater depth?
So I'd written about a lot of feminist writing, a little bit about Gothic literature, and I'd written about a scheme called the Brilliant Club. I'd done an essay through that, and they were really interested to hear about that. It was pretty much just exploring like all my interests and why I decided to do something as an extracurricular activity and how I think that would inform my degree and that type of thing.
Thank you. And Hetta, how did you experience the second interview? Or it might have been your first. I never remember. I think colleges do them differently. They can put them each way around. But what did you end up talking about?
Well, mine was my first, and I also did actually have a piece of unseen prose for that as well.
Oh, they combined them. Okay.
Yeah, so I had two, which was it was a very sort of obscure piece, and I had no idea what it was talking about, even going in. And that was where I was sort of going through my ideas with them, and they were sort of helping me along. Eventually, I found out it was about a paranoid man who thought he was being followed by a rat, but it took a long while for me to get to there. But it was okay because I'm here. And then sort of the second half of that was mainly focused, as Annabelle said, on my personal statement. There wasn't really mention of my essay or my written work. So it was mainly focused on my personal statement, the texts that I had sort of, and the books that I'd sort of mentioned and read, sort of pulling apart why I liked them. Have you thought about this sort of perspective or angle on them? Which at first I was like, why are you saying that? That's my favorite book. But it's sort of, it does force you to, again, engage in those sort of critical thinking skills and for that to be on display and for them to sort of almost see how you work with, different perspectives, different angles of things. And then I was asked about the Shakespeare as well to sort of end it up.
Okay, right. So that was at the end, how to kind of title up. Lovely. I think it's worth exploring maybe kind of the interview itself, like the idea of conversation. How do you talk to an academic? We've mentioned things like, oh, it was quite an informal chat, but they are professors, doctors at the end of the day. How did you find engaging with them? We've also said they're normal human beings. So I don't know, walk us through maybe your first impressions and then your impressions of your interviewers by the end of your interview. Heta.
Well, sort of my archetypal like view of like an Oxford professor was like an old man.
Yeah.
But they weren't at all. Like so I went in and they were both just sort of sat around on like chairs and stuff. It wasn't like there was a desk between us. It was very formal. In fact, one of my interviews there was a desk, but we were both away from it.
Okay.
So it was, yeah, it felt quite casual. I was sat on a sofa for one of them. Yeah, and I guess in terms of just like talking to them, because I felt like I was sort of figuring through my ideas and sort of giving my opinions, I wasn't necessarily worried about, oh, am I coming across as, too informal? Do I sound a bit too casual, like I'm talking to my friends, that sort of thing? I think when you're in that environment, something almost like kicks in where you know that you're not going to be like, oh yeah, you're all right, mate. Like there's a level of sort of, social etiquette that comes into play.
Sure.
That you'll know naturally just by virtue of talking to your teachers every day. But at the same time, when I say that it's informal, yeah, I was talking more or less like I am now. I didn't feel like I was overthinking, like, do I sound smart enough? Am I saying the right words or big words? It was just me talking through my ideas, and that felt okay. And that was because obviously they sort of respond to that and it's encouraged and they're nudging you along. You do feel like, okay, that sort of concern melts away in favor of talking about the subjects and the topics at hand. So that sort of becomes, or at least for me, sort of became the priority. And then worrying about sort of things like that was secondary almost.
I think that's a very good summary of it. It does sort of melt away in that you're thinking about literature. That's why you're there. You're not thinking about, how do I say hello to someone who's got all these letters after their name? Wonderful, thank you. Annabelle, how did that impact upon you?
So when I initially went in, they actually were really considerate and gave me the space to kind of settle into the environment. So the first few questions were just like, how are you? How are you finding this experience? And then it just naturally kind of blossomed from there. It wasn't like you go into a room, you sit down, they're like, right, why do you like this book? It's not like an interrogation. It was very much like a naturally occurring conversation. Also, I'm really sorry if you can hear music in the background.
Oh, don't worry, that's fine.
Some people are preparing for Christmas Carol.
Oh, right. No, don't worry.
Yeah.
Fab.
Yeah.
Thank you. Sorry, I was just about to ask you something and it's fallen right out of my head. Oh, it's so annoying when that happens, isn't it? Yes. Okay. So you both were fortunate enough to have interviews pre-pandemic when you were able to come to Oxford and enjoy the rooms and everything and see where tutors live and work. Very cool. If we're going to imagine that we are interviewees again, glad we're not, but it's a good experience and everyone's going to have to do it. How would you approach something like this? Talking to a camera on a computer? Would you try and do things differently, or do you think that there's no real need to overthink how you're preparing it and just kind of click into it as you go along with it? Annabelle.
I think I wouldn't necessarily change my tactic in terms of tackling the interview, but I would try and make my environment as cozy and as comfortable as possible if you're at home. So make a cup of tea, wear your comfiest clothes, just relax yourself. I think that will really help.
Yeah, I think that's a really good piece of advice, that there is no expectation that you wear a suit or, I don't know, a full-length dress. You can wear whatever you want to wear. So long as you're comfortable and you've got clothes on, that's generally quite a good thing. Then no one is going to judge you for how you appear. They want to interrogate how you think, and that's ultimately why Heta and Annabelle are both here. They think in a really interesting way. Heta, same question, but to you.
Yeah, exactly as Annabelle said, I think I'd focus more on just making myself comfortable and like try and, giving yourself like a distraction free environment. Just as Annabelle said, relax yourself. And if you're comfortable, then, your mind's not going to be on other things like, oh, but this light's a bit too bright and blah, blah, blah. Just, settle yourself in, and then you can prioritize and focus on the interview at hand. That would be my main thing, I'd say.
I think that's really solid advice. Thank you, both of you. Just a reminder to those watching, if you have questions you would like to ask Heta and Annabelle, just to leave them below and I will relay them to them. We haven't had any just yet, and we're about halfway through our time. But I'm wondering, for our ambassadors here, how the wait up until the interview, how that felt, because I remember it being pretty torturous. And so I would imagine that now everybody will be doing interviews remotely from home. There's more distraction going on because you don't have to travel to Oxford, have a night in a strange room. But out of interest, what were your kind of big emotions leading up to the actual interview itself? Heta.
I did definitely find it like anxious, like just sitting waiting for the day to come, because it feels so massive. You are sort of just counting down the days. But I'd say the main thing was to just try and distract yourself, maybe do a little brush up on the things you mentioned in your personal statement. I'm pretty sure I did that. But I tried to just sort of not make it this big thing that consumed all my days. I didn't really sort of mention it, just do a little bit of work and just distract myself. Luckily, I had a full-time job at the time. So
there you go.
I had 8 hours a day to like not think about that. But otherwise, my priority was on just trying to not let it consume my time in the run-up to it happening.
I mean, it's perfectly natural to be thinking about it and probably be stressed, because it is at that time in our lives a big, quite momentous thing that people probably haven't had much experience of up until that point. But trying to not let it consume your life is one of the best things you can do. I agree. Annabelle, how would you say you felt in the run-up to your interview?
It was a similar thing. I didn't really allow myself the time to worry about it. I had A-levels going on, and then it just happened, and I was like, "Oh, that's happening. Okay, great. Let's go with it." I don't think it's good to dwell on it and obsess over it. Just see it as something that's going to happen.
And then the reverse of that, once the interview is over, how did you just put it out of your mind until you got the news, Annabelle?
I don't think I did this very well.
Okay.
I thought about it a lot, and I kept checking UCAS, which you just have to accept. You have to wait, and it will come eventually, and just try and focus on other things in the meantime.
Fair enough. I mean, you'll have the Christmas holiday. Hopefully that's a nice distraction. If not, then it'll just be a torturous wait, so you might as well enjoy yourself. You can't make it happen any faster. Heta, how did you feel in that wait period immediately out of your interview up until early January, I think it is, when you find out?
Well, I think because I was on a gap year, I was quite fortunate in that I had stuff to distract me. So nice. I had my interview sort of sandwiched between work and then a Christmas holiday. So I was just with that family in a new, different place, and that completely sort of literally transported me away from that, and I didn't have to. It was such two different worlds that I didn't have to think about that. But obviously holidays, you can't just book a holiday to just get away from the Oxford interview process afterwards. But I'd say the main thing is to just try, like, you can't bring that date forward anymore, like you just can't. So you just have to fill your time the way you usually would in a Christmas holiday. Try and even do more if it really is like sitting on your conscience, but you can't you can't change time, you can't change how it works, and the day will come, but until then you just have to make the most of the time in between, because if you do get in, if you don't get in, it's still lost time stressing over something that, you know, there'll be a result there. So yeah, just to try and just make the most of that time as you normally would, because it's just one institution. It is, I mean, I would recommend coming here, but you know, it's just one academic institution. And try not to let it totally consume your free time, because as well, people are going through A levels and things like that, just enjoy the time off as well. We try and relax.
Yeah, you've been given a Christmas holiday and a break for a reason. It's to have a break. Yeah, I will forever think of the classic Friends scene, but not always applicable in such circumstances. Okay, so interviews in general, we've sort of spoken about. How would you advise someone who is in the middle of their interview and suddenly goes blank? The horror situation, you've been asked a question, you go blank. What do you do next? Annabelle, do you have an answer? Or is your mind blank?
Can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah, we can hear you, don't worry.
Okay, great. I think in that situation, you just have to maybe just be honest. I was honest when I didn't know something. I was asked a question about King Lear and I hadn't studied it. And I just said, I haven't studied that. And then he was like, okay, let's talk about something else. There's no point blagging your way through it because it will be obvious. You know, be confident in saying, I don't actually know about this, or I'm not sure, but maybe I think this could be a possibility. And then something will hopefully develop from there and you'll end up giving an answer. Yeah,
I think that's a really good attitude to have, that, as we mentioned earlier, if you knew all the answers already, why are you trying to go to university? But no, that is kind of the worst situation, when you've been asked something, there's a silence, you can't think of anything. Don't be afraid to just ask them to repeat the question, or to say, I don't know anything about that. Here's what I would guess. You can be brutally honest with what you do and don't know. Don't try and, as you say, don't fake it till you make it, because with people who are at the top of their field in literature, they will probably know you are faking it. Hetta, how about you? What would you say? You know, mine's gone blank. How do you get yourself back into the swing of it?
Yeah, I think if it's a case where you don't know the answer to the question, like Annabelle said, don't try and just muddle your way through, because that's not going to help you and it's not going to be an accurate representation of what you do know. But if it's a situation where it is just pure nerves and you think and you know the answer, or it's a text that you do know and you're just having a panic, just let yourself breathe, give yourself a minute, maybe even just say, I'm sorry, I'm blanking, just can I have a moment, just to collect yourself, and then get back into the swing of it that way. If it is the case that it is something that you know, but you're it's just sort of out of reach. But otherwise, yeah, just be comfortable or confident enough to know that you know the answer. Give yourself a minute. If it doesn't come to you, then that's okay, and they're not trying to trip you out. It's not going to be a mark against you. They'll move on the conversation. But yeah, just be honest, even if it means saying I don't know the answer, or if it means saying I just need a minute to collect my thoughts.
Oh yeah. I think that's something that's very important that you do, regardless of the way you think. So some people are very comfortable thinking out loud. Others much prefer to be completely silent and think it through in their head completely before delivering something that's well put together. You are more than welcome to mix it up. It's how you think. No one's going to prescribe how you think, but it is always a good idea to just to let the tutors know that that's your style of thinking. Just mention, oh, that's a weird one, could I have a minute to think that through? And they'll say yes. No one's going to say no. How dare you try and think differently? What's the point in that? Okay, I'm trying to think of other big interview things that people generally ask me. We haven't had any questions come through. How would you two what would you two like to know about interviews? If you were in the position of those who have just been invited, and you're in their shoes again now, what would you want to know about interviews? And can you answer those questions yourself that you're giving? Does anything immediately come to mind? Annabelle, what would you want to know?
I think I'd want to know everything and anything there is to know. And I actually think sometimes you just need to take a step back and know that no interview is going to be the same for each person. You have to free yourself from thinking that you're going to be able to conquer it and master the interview. You can't. So I guess I'm not really answering the question, but I'm just saying maybe you're not going to get all the answers to all the questions you want, and that's not a bad thing.
No, not at all. Not at all. Yeah, I think that's a really good thing to add, that, yeah, however much you might want to feel prepared, and of course we advise that you do prepare in the very good base ways of going over everything you've written, everything you've submitted, thinking about them in new ways. You won't be able to prepare for every eventuality, so you do have to kind of roll with the punches, as it were, and take the questions and the conversation in a natural way, as we've been discussing. Thank you, Annabelle. Thank you. Heta, what about you? Is there anything that you would have wanted to know? And can you answer that question for the imaginary version of yourself that's about to do another interview?
I feel like maybe a big one would be like the format, like how does it work? What are they going to ask? You know, am I going to need to do anything? And obviously we've sort of touched on that. Sometimes you might get a piece of unseen poetry, unseen prose, analyze it, they'll ask you about it. Sometimes they'll talk about things in your personal statement or your essays. And I even got asked like a hypothetical, what would you change or include in your syllabus that you're currently studying, and what's one thing that you really enjoy in it as is. So, you know, interviews vary from tutor to tutor, college to college, but those are some ideas of things that, you know, generally will be touched upon, but also just to remember, as you said, to sort of roll with the questions as they come and sort of accept that you're not going to be able to crack the codes. There's not really a code to crack. You just have to sort of understand that you're not going to know every single detail about the interview going in, and that's okay. In fact, it might lead to some new things that you never even considered, or some new things that you don't have a polished answer on, and maybe sometimes that's actually a good thing.
Definitely. But I think in terms of the question you'd originally asked, kind of what's the format going to be, rest assured that the college to which you applied and which has invited you might not be the same. Sometimes reallocation works in ways that you don't get the college you put preferred option down for. But the college that will be interviewing you will send you very clear email guidance on what to expect, your timing. They'll probably send you Teams links. They probably will not send you any pre-reading. At this point, you'll get that usually 20, 15, 5 minutes before the interview itself, because they want that time to be controlled. But you aren't going to miss anything if you're just checking your inbox. And also your junk folder. Please, everybody, get in the habit of checking your junk folder. That's one that does catch people out, and especially if you've used a school email address in your UCAS, because a lot of schools, due to everything going online, have put spam filters on. So by some horrible coincidence, the important instructions email might end up in junk. Please check your junk mail. But the format will be very clearly explained to you. It's just the content probably won't be, because that's the point of an interview. You're not supposed to know what's going to include, and it'll go down a unique path that your unique conversation with the tutors takes. Wonderful. Thank you both for that. Is there anything you would both like to add to people watching who will be coming for interview, to say to them something useful, something reassuring, something that they might not have considered, practice tips or preparation advice. The floor is yours. Just take it as it comes.
I think my main thing that I'd like people to take away from this is to not overthink it and not overplan, because they don't want to see someone who's just a reproduction of what you think they want to see. They actually want to see you. So to just be a bit more freer with your preparation. You don't have to revise like possible questions. Maybe just think, how can I look at this text in a really unique way? Or how can I challenge my own argument if you have an argument that you do firmly believe in, that sort of thing.
Brilliant, thanks. Heta, anything to add into the mix?
Again, I'd just say, remember that you're there for a reason. You've been chosen, and you've been chosen because of the product of the work you've given so far. So yeah, just be confident in the fact that you're there for a reason. They want to see more of your thinking and your thought process and your ideas. So as Annabelle said, don't sort of restrict yourself to thinking one line of thought about one set thing. Like, let yourself develop ideas, contradict your own ideas, and just remember as well that they don't always need the answers. You're allowed to think things through as you are asked them, and even think things through not knowing what your end point will be. That is all part of the process. So yeah, just remember you're there for a reason, and that there is no set way of answering a question, no set way of thinking.
Yeah, I think that's great advice to end on. Thank you very much. We are a little bit early, but I think we've really covered as much as we can about interviews without wanting to overstress people by flogging a dead horse and asking, what advice and how to do this and tips. And no. Thank you everyone for coming to watch, and a huge thank you to our ambassadors Annabelle and Heta who've been here today, and to all of them who have provided their time in the past series of 4 live streams we've done. I'd like to thank everyone who's contributed and everybody who's come and watched, and hopefully you are able to take away this advice that Heta and Annabelle have given, and if you are coming to interview, then try your best, and if it works, and if it doesn't, then it doesn't. There's really no point in laboring over all the whys and why hasn't this happened or why has this happened. Just go with it. I think that's all we can really say at the end of the day, isn't it? Wonderful. So again, thank you very much to Heta and Annabelle, and I hope you all have a lovely evening. Thank you.